with 3 recorded as present. Therefore, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi of the state of California, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 116th Congress.
If you want to find out how effective a wall is, just ask Israel. 99.9% effective. Then our wall will be every bit as good as that, if not better. Look at all of the countries that have walls, and they work 100%.
From Israel to the Vatican, President Trump has pointed out how walls have worked for other countries around the world. So why can't it work for ours?
Joining us now to discuss is former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, David Rubin. David, so great to have you with us. Now, you have at least 77 walls across the globe right now. I want to talk to you in particular, though, about Israel. Obviously, we're in a fierce debate about border security and a wall in the United States right now. What are the stats on the efficiency of the walls and fences actually built in Israel?
Well, if you want to understand whether walls work, Israel is a tremendous example because we have 2 different kinds of walls that have been built in the past couple of decades. So let's first look at the wall in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, which is the mountainous region that's north of Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem. So in Judea and Samaria, between the year 2000 and the year 2005, there were over 1,000 terrorist attacks in Israel, over 1,000 people killed in terrorist attacks, I should say. And there were several thousand who were wounded in terrorist attacks. Actually, I myself was wounded, shot and wounded in a terrorist attack along with my 3-year-old son who was shot in the head. So the terrorism was so intense, and every day people didn't know if they were going to be able to get to work or the children were going to get to school. It was a terrible situation. Israel's government decided to build a wall separating the major cities of Israel from Samaria and Judea. And so a wall was built, part of it of concrete, but most of it from very, very strong steel. It was a high wall, and it had barbed wire as well as high-tech measures. And it was very, very effective. It cut down on terrorism in Israel's cities by 95% even. So it was very, very effective. And to this day, we don't have major terrorist attacks in the big cities in Israel. Now, if you look at the southern border that separates Egypt and Israel, down there was a problem of illegal immigration. So the issue was a little bit different. It was illegal immigration as opposed to terrorism. But the illegal immigration was causing a lot of crime. And 55,000 immigrants came in from the southern border between the years 2000 and 2012. A wall was built, actually mostly fence, but physical barrier, very strong physical barrier on the entire southern border. And in the first year that it was built, the illegal entry into Israel was cut down to almost to nothing, and in the year after they raised the level and it was cut completely. So
I mean, David, we got to leave it right there, but I've been to Shiloh. The terrain there is very diverse. A wall there stopped terrorism in the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and then in the southern border, on the Egyptian border, illegal immigration was rampant. You build a wall, you build it taller, it's almost down to zero. So whether it's terrorism or illegal immigration, America's got a lot to learn.
Another round of budget talks between congressional Democrats and the White House seems to have led nowhere, with the US government shut down entering its 3rd week. The sticking point is funding for Donald Trump's border wall, and with Democrats reviving talk of impeachment, the US president is now threatening to take radical action.
Have you considered using emergency powers to grant yourself authorities to build this wall without congressional approval? And second,
yes,
on Mexico, you have?
Yes, I have. And I can do it if I want.
So you don't need congressional approval to build the wall?
No, we can use them. Absolutely. We can call a national emergency because of the security of our country. Absolutely. No, we can do it. I haven't done it. I may do it. I may do it.
Trump did indicate after the meeting when he spoke that he would actually consider calling a national emergency in order to construct his wall so that he could do so without the approval of Congress. Trump also summarized the meeting. He felt the meeting was productive, but the representatives seemed to have the other idea.
Well, for more on this, Gabby Orr is a White House reporter for Politico and joins me now. So, Gabby, while the president and these Democratic leaders are clashing, the White House sent a letter to all of Congress on border security today. What would be the purpose of sending this to like a wider group at this point?
Well, I think they want to make it very clear to Republicans who might be on the sidelines thinking that there's a chance that McConnell will turn and actually bring something to the floor in the Senate that would represent what Democrats want in this shutdown battle. The president will ultimately veto anything that comes to his desk that does not include that funding for a border wall. President Trump has stated this repeatedly over the last 2 weeks, but sending that letter, making it formal, laying that out to more moderate members of both the House and the Senate, I think really drives that message home and makes it more difficult for them to defend that and cozy up to the White House if they do turn around and back something that doesn't meet his requirements.
You know, it's important to note that the Senate, including some of the president's closest backers, actually passed a short-term spending bill without the border funding back in December. Why is it that McConnell won't budge now when it's something that could have made it through the Democratic-controlled House?
Well, that's something that Democrats have repeatedly asked. You know, why would the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, not bring forward a bill that has already essentially passed the Senate? And President Trump has said repeatedly that he will not support anything that is a clean continuing resolution, something that only includes funding for the current levels at the agencies that are currently without funding and a part of the shutdown. I think that the majority leader is feeling significant pressure at this point from the White House, from President Trump, from Vice President Mike Pence to stand strong on their opposition to a bill that does not include that wall funding.
It is a potentially large deal, a very important space achievement for China. It became the first country ever to put a probe on that far side, or the dark side of the moon. As it approached and touched down, it also sent out a series of pictures, and they are the first close-up shots of this unseen side of the moon. It faces away from the Earth at all times. That means also that it's impossible to send signals directly from the lunar surface back to Earth. So China also had to put up a communication satellite orbiting the moon to bounce back those signals. And one more thing, there is a rover vehicle on board set to explore this unknown lunar surface. Now, China has called this, and frankly, a few others have too, an important milestone, a new chapter in lunar exploration. Chinese President Xi says its burgeoning space program will, and this is a quote, make China stronger. In fact, though, the Trump administration is wary of China's intentions in space. It has also tested, among other things, anti-satellite missiles. This perhaps, according to experts, is one more reason behind President Trump's push for a space military force. The president has also said that he wants to see more manned lunar landings from the United States, maybe on the way to Mars, maybe, as you noted, the beginning of a space race.
NASA says they started 2019 with a big accomplishment. Photographic evidence yet to be seen, but possibly could be coming your way. NASA's New Horizons spacecraft has completed a flyby, they say, of an icy world 4 billion miles away from Earth. The spacecraft is making its closest approach ever, bringing it within 2,200 miles. That's almost two-thirds of the way across the United States, of Ultima Thule. Scientists hope pictures and data from the spacecraft can shed light on how the sun and the planets were formed in the solar system's earliest days.
News alert as we await more information on a U.S. citizen arrested in Russia, with that country's domestic security agency saying the man was detained on espionage charges. Rich Edson is live in Washington with more on this story. Hi, Rich.
Hey, Julie. The Russian Federal Security Service says authorities caught an American in Russia in the act of spying. The FSB says it arrested on Friday a U.S. citizen it identifies as Paul Whelan. A Russian state outlet says if he's found guilty, he faces 10 to 20 years in prison. Russian authorities have provided no further information on the American's arrest. A State Department spokesperson says, quote, "We have been formally notified of the detention by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Russia's obligation under the Vienna Convention require them to provide consular access. We've requested this access and expect Russian authorities to provide it. 2 weeks ago, a Russian citizen, Maria Butina, pleaded guilty to acting as a foreign agent to promote Russia-friendly policies in the United States. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs claims Butina is a political prisoner of the U.S. and is leading a social media campaign to free her, the type of campaign the Russian government is usually the target of, Julie.
And at the time, I guess at the same time, Vladimir Putin is reaching out to the president. I can't imagine what he has to say about this.
Now, the Kremlin says President Putin wrote a letter to President Trump with a Christmas greeting. The Russian president's office says, quote, Vladimir Putin stressed that Russia-U.S. relations are the most important factor behind ensuring strategic stability and international security, and reaffirmed that Russia is open to dialogue with the United States on the most extensive agenda. Earlier this month, President Trump canceled a formal meeting with the Russian president at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. Days before, Russia had seized Ukrainian sailors and ships in the Kerch Strait. The U.S. and Russia have been at odds over Russia's backing of the Assad regime in Syria, the poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter in England, and interference in the 2016 U.S. election. The Trump administration has previously tried to improve relations with Russia, though they have mostly deteriorated.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is threatening to revamp his nuclear weapons program. He demanded the U.S. lift harsh economic sanctions in a New Year's Day speech.
But Mr. Kim also said he's ready for another summit with President Trump. His comments come as denuclearization talks between Washington and Pyongyang seem to have stalled. For more on this, let's bring in CBSN contributor Isaac Stonefish. He's also a senior fellow at the Asia Society Center on U.S.-China relations. Isaac, good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
What did you make of this speech?
I thought Kim did a good job of both playing to his base, the North Korean people, 100% of them who support him, of course.
Good ratings?
Good ratings, yeah. By talking, most of the speech was about the economy and about trying to prioritize the North Korean economic situation. But he also did send messages to the United States and South Korea. South Korea was more of an olive branch about wanting to work together. For the United States, it was more, if you guys don't make concessions, we're not going to make concessions.
Well, if we don't lift sanctions, will he again start testing ballistic missiles? And also, what do you make of this suit? Is there a political message in his ensemble there?
So I did like the bar mitzvah boy suit. I thought it was very professional. I think he was trying to communicate that, yes, North Korea has this impression globally of being a very weird place, but he knows how to play it like the international banker finance outfit that he was wearing. I think in terms of the specific issue of sanctions with the United States, I think what Kim Jong-un wants is more of a outreach, more of an olive branch, more from the U.S. before he makes concessions. And North Korea has always been excellent at playing really well with the very meager hand that it's dealt, and I think this speech is another example of that.
We have, surprisingly, you might almost say miraculously, a North Korean leader and an American leader. There they are, they're smiling, they're waving, they're saying, come on, stick with us, we're going to make this work. And yet people who follow this closely say, we're never going to get there because what North Korea wants and what we're willing to give are just too far apart. Can you explain that as it applies to denuclearization?
So I think if we don't want denuclearization, if we say, okay, we are comfortable with a nuclear North Korea.
But we're not, are we?
We say we're not.
Okay, let me stick with your hypothetical. Okay, if we are.
If we, even though we say we're not, if we are, then what Trump did in 2018 was fantastic. Reduced tensions from a very high place, met with a North Korean leader, and North Korea is now much less of a pressing threat. Now, if we actually think we want denuclearization of North Korea, we are probably further away from that than at any point we've ever been, possibly in history.
Why not? He says he's willing to do it. Why won't we give him what he wants? What does he want, and why won't we give it to him?
He's saying he wants denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And that means to North Koreans something very, very different from what it might mean to you and us, to you and I. What he means is no nuclear umbrella over South Korea, no U.S., a lot less U.S. troops, maybe no U.S. troops in South Korea, and the U.S. not working with South Korea to defend it in the case of a North Korean attack. What we want him to mean is, okay, no nuclear weapons in South Korea. There aren't any nuclear weapons in South Korea, and therefore no nuclear weapons in North Korea. But that seems basically impossible. So I think we have to decide. I think we are in this sort of cognitive dissonance state where we're allowing this idea of, oh, we are going to denuclearize, but it's not going to happen.
All right, we also want to talk to you about trade negotiations. We call it a trade war between the U.S. and China. The president has taken a hardline approach with Beijing. What do you expect in 2019? Because this has ramifications not just for American markets, for everything, for criminal justice, extradition, international relationships. Do you think that tensions will continue to escalate?
It is a massive story. And I do think that, while it's very difficult to predict, I think it is more likely that the U.S. and China will resolve at least some of their differences. I think this will be similar to North Korea in that I think Trump will claim this great breakthrough whereby very little actually happens, but Trump takes credit for a massive restructuring of trade, and both leaders can say, okay, we solved it, and we can move on.
Is there pressure on China? How much is this hurting them?
So I think where this is hurting China economically is less in the actual numbers and statistics, and Chinese statistics on the economy are generally pretty terrible anyway, and more on the perception of confidence and Xi Jinping's ability to do what he says. He has this sort of invincible aura, or at least he had this sort of invincible aura, and his inability to resolve this hurts him on that and hurts the economy on that, as opposed to actually really hitting in on the numbers sense.
It will be interesting to see, especially if we can reach some kind of deal or resolution, how that impacts, of course, the pending extradition of the Huawei executive and so many other things going on in Washington.
Certainly.
Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Help us make sense of the crazy world.
Last night we reported on the hackers that call themselves the Dark Overlord. On New Year's Day, they threatened to release documents from the 9/11 litigation and investigation files. To those who don't want those documents released into the public domain, pay us, they said, in Bitcoin, no less. Likewise, to those who do want to see those documents, they said, pay us. If you're on YouTube, that segment will be linked in the description below. Well, later last night, we got some of those infamous documents that we have been talking about. The Dark Overlord released 2 of what they call the checkpoints. They want this release to serve as proof that what they're saying really is true, that the parties involved should comply before this gets worse. All right, for more on this, let's talk now to NRS correspondent Michelle Greenstein. She's been looking into this for us. So they say, look, we got the goods. We're proving it to you with some documents that we've now released that show that we really mean business. So please tell us, what are they showing?
So I went through these documents at a pretty high level. They're basically just some legal documents related to litigation that was either decided or settled years ago. Some of it was confidential, but none seemed to impose any new liabilities, and nothing yet has been related to who knew what when, or whether or not this was an inside job type thing. So it's basically a kind of a giant yawn for me so far. We've got some settlement disclosures, but nothing earth-shattering there. It's basically a bunch of giant corporations and insurance companies trying to push costs, like damages or wrongful death claims, onto someone else. No one wants to pay.
Well, the House Energy and Commerce Committee says that the first hearing under its new Democratic leadership will be about climate change. Some of the newest members of Congress emphasize the issue in their campaigns, and has also become a hot-button topic with prospective 2020 presidential candidates. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg recently released a book on potential solutions to solve the growing climate crisis. And Washington Governor Jay Inslee has toyed with the idea of running in 2020 on the climate change platform. All this comes as scientists are warning that 2019 could be the hottest year on record, and as a likely El Nino event approaches the country. Samantha Stevenson is an assistant professor and climate scientist at the University of California, Santa Barbara's Bren School of Environmental Science and Management. She's also a co-author of the study of the impact of El Nino. Samantha, thank you very much for joining us. Can you explain for us why 2019 could really be a record-breaking year for temperatures?
Oh, sure, of course. So, it's still a little bit early to say whether 2019 will in fact be the hottest year ever. But generally speaking, when you have an El Nino event, the ocean is releasing a lot of heat into the atmosphere. And so it tends to lead to a hotter than average global temperature. And so when that's layered on top of the warming trends that we're already seeing, where in fact already some 9 out of the 10 hottest years on record have occurred since 2005, and you're adding another El Nino induced warming on top of that, then that's why we expect that there could be another temperature record set. But again, we have to wait and see a few months before we know exactly how much warming we're going to see.
You know, the most recent El Nino event ended in 2016. What are the consequences of that?
So an El Nino is associated with warming in the Pacific Ocean in the eastern equatorial Pacific. And that has effects both on the ocean itself, and it affects weather patterns throughout the world.
A Japanese restaurant owner has paid a record $3.1 million for a single Pacific bluefin tuna. The auction took place Friday at Tokyo's famed fish market. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes with our partners at BBC News has more.
Many traders were expecting a new record to be set at this year's opening tuna auction, and they were not disappointed. The price paid by Kiyoshi Kimura for his 278-kilo prize was far higher than his own previous record. Mr. Kimura is known as Japan's tuna king, and the price he pays at the annual New Year auctions bears only a vague relationship to the actual price of tuna. On a normal day, a similar-sized fish would sell for around £45,000. Today's record is in part about status, and it creates a lot of publicity for Mr. Kimura and his sushi empire. But it is also a reflection of the scarcity of large Pacific bluefin tuna. They are officially listed as an endangered species. Last year, catches off the coast of Japan were significantly down, and since the middle of last year, prices in Tokyo have climbed by more than 40%. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Tokyo.
Catholic bishops across the U.S. begin a week-long meeting today to discuss looming questions about the clergy sex abuse crisis. They're meeting at a seminary north of Chicago at the request of the Pope, who is sending his personal preacher to the retreat.
CBS News has also learned of several cases in which nuns have faced accusations of sexual misconduct. Nikki Batiste reports.
This is Sister Shaw.
Yes, this is Sister Eileen Shaw.
This is the nun Trish Cahill says she confided in when she was 15 years old.
I would have done anything for her. I would have died for her.
At a convent in New Jersey, she says she told Eileen Shaw things she'd never revealed to anyone about her now deceased uncle, a priest, whom she claims sexually abused her starting at age 5.
She gave me everything that was lacking that I didn't even know I was lacking. I was so broken. She filled in all those pieces.
She now describes that process as grooming, saying Shaw plied her with drugs and alcohol while teaching her how to have sex with a woman.
I'm with my friends during the day, and I'm with this pedophile nun on the evenings and on the weekends and in the summer.
Pedophile nun is a phrase I think most of our viewers will have never heard.
Really? Wow. That's really a shame because there's a lot of them out there. It's the secret not yet told.
Mary Dispenza is trying to change that.
The demands of chastity and celibacy are unrealistic demands for many of us.
Dispenza, a former nun from another congregation, remembers what happened when a superior summoned her to her room.
I knelt down right next to her, and she kissed me all over softly my face. And I want to say, oh, but it wasn't bad. But it was, and I've carried it with me till today.
Through her work with SNAP, the survivors network of those abused by priests, she says she would occasionally hear about abuse or cover-ups by nuns. But since the publication of a grand jury report identified hundreds of pedophile priests in Pennsylvania, at least 18 people have contacted her to share stories of abuse by religious sisters.
We've heard so much about alleged child sex abuse by priests. Why haven't we heard about nuns?
A lot has to do with the culture of nuns, they are very, very private by nature.
Trish Cahill reported her abuse to the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth in 1994. The congregation paid her a $70,000 out-of-court settlement.
They had canon lawyers on retainer just for people like me. Shut her up, pacify her, tell her you love her and you'll pray for her, and send her on her way.
In a statement, the congregation tells CBS News the case was investigated immediately when it was reported in 1994, and a settlement was reached that was mutually agreed on by all parties. We believe that the Sisters of Charity acted in a responsible manner.
Hi, is this Eileen?
We reached out to Sister Eileen Shaw, who Cahill says she continued to see for years as an adult.
You don't wish to discuss this at all? She just hung up.
The Sisters of Charity removed her from her role as a grade school principal, but report she remains a nun. They're providing her with food and housing while restricting her from outside ministry.
I think it's really sad.
In the meantime, Cahill says the settlement she signed wasn't enough to help her deal with a lifetime of trauma.
What is your hope?
That this is the beginning of many, many times more that I get to speak, and I get to educate, and I get to possibly prevent this from happening to anyone ever again.
So Nikki Batiste is joining us now with more on this story. Really disturbing. And you know what? I was also surprised to hear nuns. Are the victims all women?
In this case, of the 18 victims, we've spoken with several of them. At least one is actually a male. It's a question a lot of people have asked me after their initial surprise that nuns are involved in this at all. So they're primarily women, but some males have also been sexually abused by nuns.
It just feels like a cabal, and I just wonder, where is the Pope on all this?
The Pope has not said a lot. I think a lot of the U.S. bishops here are waiting to go to the Global Conference of Bishops in Rome in February, where the Pope has promised he will address the sexual abuse issue and set some really concrete steps. So I think we have to wait and see what those will be.
So why do you suppose we haven't heard about nuns being perpetrators in this sort of sexual abuse? I know in the piece, the woman that you spoke to said that, you know, they're particularly private, but they're not any more private than priests.
I think that perhaps, I know a lot of the victims we spoke with, the shame, first of all, a lot of them didn't want to come forward, just like a lot of the victims we've heard who have say they've been abused by priests. Also, I think perhaps they might think it's harder to believe because this is a female. She's probably maternal. How could a nun, how could a woman do this? And really, it wasn't until the Pennsylvania grand jury report where others started coming forward about priests that a lot of these victims told us they finally felt like maybe they'd even be believed in this case. And then you have a nun who says she was sexually abused by another nun. Can't not believe her.
You know, and while I was watching your piece, and you sort of lead with the idea that as a child she confides in this nun about what is happening to her. And as you point out, to find that somebody who you might consider an ally is actually an enabler, how is she processing that even today?
Trish Cahill has been struggling with this her entire life. She told us her parents weren't great. One was an alcoholic. This nun took advantage of the fact that she needed someone in her life and groomed her. And that's what we've seen in case after case.
So there's this week-long meeting, right, happening in Chicago to discuss the abuse of priests by priests. Presumably it will expand beyond that. Do we know anything more about what's going to happen at this meeting?
What we know is that the Pope asked for the bishops here to meet in Chicago. This is the first time they've had a retreat like this. Initially, we were told that they would discuss the sexual abuse allegations going on. Since then, last night, they told us, no, it's just going to be prayer. They're just going to sort of process everything that's gone on. They've been asked to wait to go to see the Pope in February.
That's interesting, but also kind of disappointing.
Yes.
I mean, how long? There's been ongoing discussions about this. I mean,
it's hard to believe that they aren't going to be discussing it behind closed doors. But, you know, the church has been really shut down. Everyone's waiting, particularly the victims, to hear what is going to be done.
You know, Nikki, you've been covering this story for quite some time now, and I know that you and I were talking offline a little bit about how people are starting to reach out to you with their stories, and that's just sort of an indication of how powerful your reporting is, and probably means that there's a lot more people out there that we don't know about who are going to watch this and perhaps feel that there's an opportunity for them to tell their story. So thank you very much.
Thank you.